Hi guys, how are you all today morning? Good morning. Today is 10th November 2023. My name is TSV Raghavan and I live in Chennai, Tamil Nadu, India. This is my spiritual vlog on YouTube. HARDAN, 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 Haribol, TSV Nectar, NECTAR, nectar. In this particular vlog, in all my previous videos, we have been discussing about the knowledge and information that we have gleaned through the study of spiritual books, scriptures, contemplation on the material universe, and meditation on the spiritual universe. This particular video in this vlog is no exception to that rule. In fact, it is a mere continuation of all that we have been doing in all my previous videos. Kindly subscribe to this vlog and press the bell icon so that I may keep reminding you of all my previous, present, and future videos. So, let us continue with the topic of discussion for today's video. We have already been analyzing the life of every average human living entity in this material world through various videos of ours. However, to have a summary of all this, let us again have a recap of all that we have learned. Let us begin at the spot when a particular spirit soul, after getting enveloped by the four layers of the material body, namely the first layer of causal intelligence and logic, the second layer of astral mind, feelings and emotions, and the third layer of etheric body of senses, namely sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch, and the fourth gross body made up of four natural elements, namely air, fire, water, and earth. Here I would like to remind every viewer that we all change our identity immediately after the actual or original spirit soul gets enveloped by these four layers of material body. It becomes what is known as a living entity. This living entity, along with the spirit soul, becomes a part and parcel of this material world henceforth. This may have irritated the spirit soul, but now there is no other go because it was its own desire, whims, and fantasies which made it gravitate towards the material world in the first place. If only the spirit spark had not done so, it would not have become a spirit soul, and if it had not touched the material world, it would not have been enveloped by these four layers of material body. In other words, the root for all this problem is that spirit spark which try to get attracted to the material world under complacence and superiority complex and overconfidence that it can easily lord over God's inferior energy, that is the material world. We all know by now that according to the scriptures of yore, the spirit side is God's superior energy and the material side is God's inferior energy. The spirit part belongs to that category of superior energy. However, it is minuscule as an individual in nature, whereas this inferior energy of the material world is, though inferior, very huge and extremely powerful. When this overconfident spirit spark gets attracted in the first place to the material world and thinks overconfidently that it can lord it over this material world, it as a spirit soul gets enveloped by these four layers of the material body. As soon as this happens, the same spirit spark turned spirit soul and now turned living entity is forced to get itself acclimatized in this material world. After it does so, after a very long time, this living entity, which was dormant till then, is ready to get into a rut or chain of endless births and deaths in this material world in various species. The first birth and death happens as a mere cell for that living entity. From there on, it graduates to algae, amoeba, weeds, shrubs, creepers, plants, trees, worms, insects, reptiles, birds, bees, amphibians, and so on to the level of herbivorous and carnivorous beasts, and then ultimately graduates into getting a birth in the human species. The human species birth is the ultimate birth for a living entity. Even among human species, there are 400,000 or more varieties of humans in this material world. This particular average living entity has to go through a cycle of endless births and deaths in at least 50% of these human species during its own journey through the cycle of infinite births and deaths in this material world. This we must understand till we proceed further. Till a particular average living entity does not take birth in the human species, a particular term or quality called destiny or karma does not apply to that living entity. Right from the birth as a cell in its first birth till the last birth in the animal beastly kingdom, this particular living entity is not subjected to this particular term called destiny or karma. These are applicable only to the human species. In the case of all other births, this particular living entity has only memories in its superconscious memory in its psyche as a living entity. However, as soon as it starts getting birth as a first birth in the human species, this program or cycle of destiny or karma begins for that living entity. From now on, whatever efforts or karma that particular living entity does in any particular lifetime as a human being is duly recorded by its superconscious memory. However, out of all the karma in the lifetime, at least 90% is worked out in that particular lifetime itself, and so it gets nullified. And ultimately, only a residue of 10% or 15% remains unworked by the time this particular living entity breathes its last in that particular lifetime, in that particular birth. This 10 or 15% is kept duly recorded in the superconscious memory of that particular living entity's psyche. This unworked residue of 10% or 15% karma of that living entity is known as sanchit karma. When this particular living entity ends its life in that particular lifetime, then when it is poised to take another birth in the human species in another lifetime, it all begins by this living entity taking a slice of the unworked karma of its previous lifetime, which is kept duly recorded in that storage of sanchit karma. This slice of sanchit karma lays the foundation for the next birth of that particular living entity. This slice of sanchit karma is known as prarabdha karma. Now, when a particular living entity starts getting births after births and deaths after deaths in various lifetimes in that human species, this sanchit karma or storage of karma keeps increasing and reducing consistently due to several births. All this is kept duly recorded in the psyche of that particular living entity. The volume, quantity, and quality of Sanchit karma of a particular human living entity keeps growing depending upon the karma of that living entity in any birth or in any lifetime. This grown thick volume of Sanchit karma is usually used by that living entity to be applied and taken a slice out of for the next birth of that living entity in a human species. In other words, of the thick volume of Sanchit Karma, one slice is taken by the same living entity to be used as a foundation for its next birth in the human species. This keeps going on and on till it gets liberated from repeated lives, births, and deaths. But something about this in our other videos. Here we shall talk about only Sanchit Karma, Prarabdha Karma, and purpose in life. As we all know, while going through this infinite cycle of birth and death, one day the evolved, experienced, and matured living entity understands for once that its idea or aim is not to vegetate in this material world as a living entity in a human species. Actually, there is a hidden, dormant purpose in life for that living entity in this particular birth. As soon as this living entity comes to realize this, it tries to find out what purpose that is. Initially, invariably, this purpose in life happens to be only simple and totally material. This purpose keeps improving life of time after lifetime for that particular living entity as it keeps achieving its purpose in life in a particular birth in human species. However, here I would hasten to add that any purpose in life for any living entity need not necessarily be completely achieved in that particular lifetime itself. The only thing is that the living entity has the right to concentrate on that purpose and reach some distance in the path of that purpose in one lifetime. All the karma which is unworked in that journey is stored in the Sanchit karma, and when a Prarabdha karma slice from that Sanchit karma is taken by the same living entity in another birth, then it becomes a seeded player in that particular journey towards that purpose in life. In other words, when the spared work to achieve a purpose has already been done by a living entity in a particular birth, then it need not do it again in its next birth. In the next birth, it may begin where it ended in the previous birth, according to the foundation laid for this particular birth by the prarabdha karma of that living entity. This goes on till this particular living entity reaches a level where all its material purposes have ended and its spiritual purposes have begun. The ultimate bullseye for every living entity in this world is to get self realized as the original spirit soul, which was raw and unevolved in the beginning, but which has now become mature, experienced, and and evolved after so many births and deaths in this material world in that cocoon of four layers of material body. Once this self realization happens, this particular spiritual then understands its own stature as a prisoner in that cocoon of four layers of material body, and it tries to wriggle out of that shell of four layers of material body, namely the first layer of causal body of intelligence and logic, the second layer of astral body of mind, feelings, and emotions, the third layer of etheric body of senses, namely sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch, and the fourth gross body made up of four material elements, namely air, fire, water, and earth. Here I would like to add for all of us viewers that it is this fourth layer of gross body which identifies a particular living entity in this material world. The other three layers of causal body of intelligence, astral body of mind, and etheric body of senses are made up of the first element, namely ether, which can neither be experienced nor seen by the naked eye of any living entity. However, it is the vibrations from these three subtle bodies that reaches a mass of tissue called brain in the gross body of the same living entity, where such vibrations are continuously processed by that particular brain and percolated down the gross body of that living entity to be used as reactions towards anything which ultimately becomes the karma or effort of that particular living entity in that particular birth. This cycle goes on and on for every living human entity. Once this particular spirit soul gets self realized as its original identity of being a spirit soul, it tries to break out of this shell of four layers of material body and to end this cycle of infinite births and deaths in this material world for that particular living entity. This process of successfully breaking out of that shell is known as liberation. Liberation from this infinite, endless journey of birth and death in this particular material world is called the ultimate aim of that particular spirit soul in this material world. Once it gets totally liberated from this endless cycle of birth and death, then the final journey is that of getting delivered to the Supreme Personality of Godhead in one process or the other, one day or the other. When the same spirit spark turned spirit soul turned living entity again turned spirit soul gets totally evolved and matured and experienced due to its endless cycle of birth and death in this material world. It gets qualified and poised enough to join the Supreme Personality of Godhead through deliverance. Deliverance is the ultimate process or aim of every spirit spark which originally got ejected from the spirit hole to get an experience of life itself as an individual spirit spark. The ultimate aim of every one of us is to get delivered to the Supreme Personality of Godhead so that we need not take birth in this material world again and become a part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This particular process has been discussed by us time and again in various videos of ours where we have tried to discuss this particular theory by and authenticated it by discussing several case histories of people who have tried to complete some purpose in a life in the material world, whether material or spiritual. Here I would like to add that the first spirit spark and the first spirit soul which got in touch with the material world were inexperienced, immature, and unevolved. However, only after going through the rut of repeated births and deaths in the material world did every spirit soul get experienced, matured, and evolved. Here I would like to add one particular saying in Hindi or in English. In Hindi it is said that raw gold dust or raw gold is tempered through the fire of life before it is converted into expensive and priceless gold jewelry studded with pearls, diamonds, and precious stones. Unless and until the raw gold is so tempered, it cannot have its own intrinsic value increased manifold. is said that God takes some people to deep waters not to drown them but to clean them. In other words, unless and until any spirit spark turned spirit soul turned living entity goes through the endless struggles in the material world in infinite births and deaths, it does not get tempered, matured, and experienced enough to be qualified to get liberated from this repeated cycle of material birth and death and finally get delivered to the Supreme Personality of Godhead one day or the other. This is all I wanted to say in this particular video. Kindly let me know what you think of my talk on this subject in this particular video. Please give me your own expert views, thoughts, opinions, and ideas so that I may keep reminding you of all my other videos and blend your own opinions with mine for the sake of this society. Before concluding, let me remind you that I am also a, a published author with Amazon Kindle and paperback. I write on spiritualism, fiction, and assorted subjects. Spiritualism happens to be my favorite subject. Till we meet in my next video, it is good morning from TSV Raghavan.